The call came at 3:47 a.m. When you work for the Yakuza's supernatural division, calls at that hour mean one of two things. Something extremely dangerous has escaped containment, or someone extremely powerful needs something they can't get through normal channels. This was the second kind. I let the phone ring 3 times before answering. Old habit. Never seem too eager, even when the Vatican is calling. Speak. Though I'd grown up speaking Japanese at home in Osaka. The voice on the other end was Italian, careful, measuring each word. Mr. Tanaka, we have a situation that requires your particular expertise. Cardinal Lombardi wishes to discuss terms. I sat up in my apartment in Roppongi, Tokyo, already beginning to wake up outside my window. The Vatican doesn't call the Yakuza unless they've exhausted every other option. That meant whatever they were dealing with had beaten their best exorcists, their demon retrieval units, their entire arsenal of holy relics and blessed weapons. I'm listening, I said. Not over the phone. A car will collect you in 90 minutes. Bring your tools. The line went dead. I stood and walked to my closet where my gear hung in perfect order. The Yakuza had trained me since I was 12, after my mother died and left me with nothing but her bloodline, and a reputation I didn't understand until much later. She'd been part of this division too, though she never told me. I only found out when they came to collect me from the group home. 2 men in dark suits who knew things about demons that no human should know. My name is Kai Tanaka. I'm 31 years old. I was born in San Francisco to an American father who left before I could walk, and a Japanese mother who brought me to Osaka when I was 4. She raised me alone, working nights at a bar in Namba, and on weekends she'd take me to temples where she'd pray for protection I didn't think we needed. She died when I was 11. The official report said it was a heart attack, but I saw the marks on her body at the funeral. Claw marks. Burns that looked like they came from the inside out. The Yakuza came to me the next day and explained what she'd really been doing all those nights she claimed to be working. She'd been hunting demons. The Yakuza, most people think, is just organized crime. Protection rackets, gambling, prostitution. That's the surface level, the part they let the world see. But beneath that, there's another structure entirely. A division that deals with the things that threaten our operations from below. Demons, spirits, entities from places that don't have names in any human language. We don't do exorcisms. The church does exorcisms. We do something else. We negotiate. And when negotiation fails, we enforce. The training was brutal. They took me to a compound in the mountains outside Kyoto, a place that doesn't appear on any map. There were 12 of us, all children who'd lost parents to the work. They taught us to see things most humans can't see, to speak languages that hurt your throat when you pronounce them correctly, to move through spaces that exist between the physical and the spiritual. Most importantly, they taught us that demons respect strength. Not holy strength, not divine authority, just strength. The kind that comes from being willing to do what needs to be done without hesitation. I graduated when I was 19. My first solo job was in Nagoya, a possessed businessman who'd made a deal for success and then tried to back out. The demon had taken up residence in his body and was using it to kill his competitors in ways that attracted attention. Messy attention. I didn't exorcise the demon. I negotiated. The demon wanted to stay in the physical world, wanted the sensations of flesh and food and pleasure. I offered it a better host, someone who'd made a deal willingly and wouldn't fight the possession. The demon accepted. Problem solved. That was 12 years ago. Since then, I've handled hundreds of cases, possessions, hauntings, breaches in reality where things slip through from whatever hell they come from. I've worked in Tokyo, Seoul, Bangkok, Manila. Anywhere the Yakuza has interests, I protect those interests from supernatural interference. The Yakuza doesn't appreciate competition. That includes competition from hell. The car that picked me up was a black Mercedes with Vatican plates. The driver was Swiss Guard, though he wasn't wearing his ceremonial uniform. He didn't speak during the drive to Haneda Airport, where a private jet was waiting on a closed runway. Inside the jet, Cardinal Lombardi was already seated, a thin man in his 60s, with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much. He gestured to the seat across from him. "Mr. Tanaka, thank you for coming." I sat down and placed my equipment bag at my feet. The jet began moving before I'd even fastened my seatbelt. "Your Eminence, what's the situation?" Lombardi folded his hands on the table between us. We have a demon in the Vatican, specifically in the papal apartments. It has been bothering His Holiness for 3 weeks now. Bothering, I repeated. Define bothering. Appearing in his bedroom at night, speaking to him, not threatening, not attacking, just present, talking. I leaned back in my seat. And you've tried exorcism? 47 times. Every ritual in our archives. 3 of our best exorcists have tried and failed. The demon simply ignores them. It's not bound to the physical world in any way we understand. It comes and goes as it pleases. What does it want? It says it wants to talk. Just talk. But His Holiness hasn't slept properly in 3 weeks. He's exhausted, distracted during important meetings. This cannot continue. I studied the Cardinal. You want me to kill it. We want you to make it stop. How you accomplish that is your concern. And payment? The Vatican Bank will transfer 5 million euros to your organization upon successful completion, plus expenses. 5 million euros. That was serious money, even for us. This demon must be causing significant problems if they were willing to pay that much. What else aren't you telling me? Lombardi hesitated. Cardinals don't hesitate unless the truth is complicated. The demon claims to be only 1,200 years old. Young, by demonic standards. But it knows things it shouldn't know. Private conversations, confessional secrets, things that only His Holiness should know. It's reading his mind. We don't think so. We've had telepathic experts examine His Holiness. There's no connection, no invasion. The demon simply knows. I nodded slowly. A demon that knew secrets without obvious access to them. That was unusual. Demons aren't omniscient. They're powerful and ancient, but they're not gods. If this one knew papal secrets without reading minds or possessing anyone, it was accessing information from somewhere else. The jet landed at Fiumicino Airport as the sun was setting over Rome. Another car was waiting, this time a plain sedan. We drove through the city as evening turned to night. The ancient buildings lit by street lamps that made everything look theatrical. I'd been to Rome twice before on Yakuza business. Once to deal with a possessed banker who was embezzling from accounts we had interests in, and once to retrieve a cursed artifact that had been stolen from a warehouse in Naples. Rome always felt heavy to me. Too much history, too many layers of death and ritual stacked on top of each other. The Vatican was worse. It sat at the center of all that weight, like a black hole pulling everything toward it. We entered through a private gate far from the tourist entrances. Swiss guards in their formal uniforms checked our credentials and waved us through. Cardinal Lombardi led me through corridors I'd only seen in documentaries, marble floors and frescoed ceilings that had witnessed centuries of power and prayer. His Holiness is resting, Lombardi said. You'll meet with him in the morning. For now, I'll show you the papal apartments, and you can examine the site. Has the demon appeared during the day? Never. Only at night. Always between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. And it speaks. What language? Italian primarily, though it has also used Latin, Greek, and once, Aramaic. I nodded. A polyglot demon. That suggested age and education, though Lombardi had said it claimed to be only 1,200 years old. That was young for a demon with linguistic range. Most demons that old could speak 2, maybe 3 languages at most. This one had either lied about its age or learned languages much faster than normal. The papal apartments were on the 3rd floor of the Apostolic Palace. The rooms were elegant but not ostentatious. A bedroom, a study, a private chapel, a sitting room. Everything was decorated in whites and golds, with religious art on every wall. Crucifixes, paintings of saints, relics in glass cases. I walked through each room slowly, feeling the air, testing the temperature, looking for signs of supernatural presence. The bedroom was where it happened, Lombardi said, so I focused there. The room was cold. Not winter cold, but the kind of cold that comes from absence. Like standing in a place where something has been removed, and the space hasn't filled back in yet. I knelt and touched the floor. The marble was warm, as it should be from the heating system beneath. But the air above it was cold. You've had the room blessed, I said. Multiple times. It makes no difference. I stood and examined the bed. Nothing unusual. The sheets were Italian linen, expensive, but ordinary. The pillows showed the indentation where the Pope had been sleeping. On the nightstand was a Bible, reading glasses, a glass of water. Show me where the demon appears. Lombardi pointed to the corner of the room opposite the bed. There. It stands in that corner and watches him. When His Holiness wakes, it begins speaking. I walked to the corner and stood where the demon would stand. From this position, I could see the entire room. The door, the windows, the bed. It was a tactical position. The kind you'd choose if you wanted to monitor everything while remaining difficult to approach. I knelt again and examined the floor in the corner. The marble here was different. Not in color or texture, but in the way it felt. There was a seam, almost invisible, where one tile met another. I ran my finger along it and felt a faint vibration, like touching a speaker playing music too low to hear. There's a breach here, I said. A breach. A weak point between this world and wherever demons come from. It's old. Very old. Older than this building. Lombardi's face went pale. That's impossible. The Apostolic Palace was built in the 16th century. The building was. But what's underneath it is older. Much older. I stood and looked at him. The demon isn't coming from hell in the abstract sense. It's coming from something beneath this room. Something that predates Christianity. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that the Vatican was built on top of something that was already here. Something that's been waiting. Lombardi crossed himself. We need to seal it. You can't seal a breach that old with prayer alone. It would take ritual work that would probably destabilize the entire building. And even if you succeeded, it wouldn't stop this demon. It's not using the breach to enter. It's using it as an anchor, a connection point. Then what do we do? I talk to it. Lombardi looked at me like I'd suggested we invite the devil to dinner. Absolutely not. We hired you to remove it, not negotiate with it. Cardinal, you've tried 47 exorcisms. None of them worked. This demon isn't possessing anyone. It's not attacking. It's just present. That means it wants something specific. Let me find out what. And if it wants something we can't give, then I'll use other methods. I didn't elaborate on what those methods were. The Yakuza had tools that the church didn't. Weapons forged from materials that existed in the spaces between worlds. Rituals that didn't ask for divine intervention but simply imposed will through force. The church relied on faith and authority. We relied on leverage and consequences. Lombardi finally nodded. Very well. You'll stay in the guest quarters tonight. The demon should appear around 2 a.m. I'll have someone wake you at 1:30. Don't bother. I'll be in the bedroom waiting. You intend to confront it alone? That's how negotiation works. I spent the hours between sunset and midnight preparing. From my equipment bag, I removed the tools I'd need. A blade forged from iron taken from a meteorite that fell in Hokkaido 300 years ago. The Yakuza called it the Heaven Blade because it had come from outside this world. Demons didn't like it. Not because it was blessed, but because it was foreign to them. It didn't belong in their understanding of reality. I also had salt mixed with ash from funeral pyres, a binding agent that worked on spirits because it contained the residue of human endings. A small vial of my own blood, taken that morning and treated with herbs my mother had taught me about before she died. Blood magic wasn't holy, but it was powerful. Your own blood could be used as a signature, a way of marking territory and declaring ownership. And finally, I had a mirror. Not glass, but polished obsidian, black and reflective. Demons could be trapped in mirrors under the right conditions, but more importantly, mirrors could show you what something really was. Demons wore shapes that made sense to human perception, but their true forms were different. Seeing the truth made it easier to negotiate. It was hard to be intimidated by something when you could see its actual shape. I set up in the papal bedroom at midnight. The Swiss guards outside the door didn't question me. Lombardi had given orders. I arranged my tools on the floor in front of the corner where the demon appeared. The blade within easy reach. The mirror propped against the wall. The vial of blood tucked in my jacket pocket. Then I waited. The Vatican at night was quiet in a way that felt unnatural. No traffic sounds, no voices, just the settling of old stone and the whisper of ventilation systems. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall opposite the corner and let my breathing slow. This was meditation, but not the kind that sought enlightenment. This was tactical meditation, the kind that prepared you for violence. My mother had taught me this when I was young, before I knew what she really did, before I understood why she'd wake up in the middle of the night and disappear for hours. She'd sit with me in our small apartment in Osaka and teach me to breathe, to quiet my mind, to find the still point at the center of fear. Fear is useful, she'd said, but only if you control it. If it controls you, you're already dead. I'd asked her what she was afraid of, and she'd smiled. Everything, but I don't let it stop me. She died fighting something in an abandoned warehouse near the port. The Yakuza told me later that she'd gone in alone to investigate reports of missing dock workers. She found a nest of demons that had been pulling people through a breach and feeding on them. She killed 3 before the 4th one got her. They gave me her blade when I graduated from training. It was smaller than mine, designed for her hands. I kept it in my apartment in a place of honor. I didn't carry it on jobs. It felt wrong to use her blade for Yakuza work. She'd been fighting to protect people. I was fighting to protect business interests. Not the same thing. The clock on the nightstand read 1:47 a.m. when the temperature dropped. It happened suddenly, like someone had opened a freezer door. My breath became visible in the air. The corner where the demon would appear began to darken, shadows pooling there like liquid. I stood slowly, my hand moving to the heaven blade. I didn't draw it. Not yet. Drawing a weapon too early changes the nature of a conversation. I wanted to talk first, fight later, if necessary. The shadows in the corner coalesced into a shape, humanoid, roughly my height, but the proportions were wrong. The arms were too long, the torso too narrow. The head was tilted at an angle that would have broken a human neck. As I watched, the shape refined itself, becoming more human, more comprehensible. It settled into the form of a young man, maybe 25 years old, dressed in simple robes that looked Roman in style. Dark hair, dark eyes, pale skin. The face was beautiful in an unsettling way, too symmetrical, too perfect. No one actually looked like that. It was a mask, a presentation. The demon looked at me and smiled. You're not a priest. No. Good. I was getting tired of priests. The voice was soft, almost gentle. Male, but with an androgynous quality that made it hard to place. It spoke Italian with an accent I couldn't identify. You're Yakuza. You know that how? I can smell it on you. Blood and ash and iron. You're a killer. That's refreshing. Finally, someone interesting. I kept my hand near the blade but didn't draw it. I'm here to negotiate. Negotiate what? Your departure. The Vatican wants you gone. The demon laughed. It was a genuine laugh, not the theatrical kind demons sometimes use to unsettle people. The Vatican has wanted me gone for 3 weeks. They've thrown everything they have at me. Prayers, rituals, holy water, consecrated salt. Nothing works. What makes you think you can succeed where they failed? Because I'm not trying to banish you. I'm trying to understand what you want. The demon's expression changed. The smile faded, replaced by something that looked almost like sadness. What I want. That's an interesting question. Do you know how long it's been since someone asked me what I wanted? 1,200 years? Longer. Much longer. The demon moved closer, gliding across the floor without walking. It stopped a few feet from me, close enough that I could smell it. Ozone and copper and something sweet, like flowers left too long in a vase. I want to talk to the Pope. You've been talking to him for 3 weeks. No. I've been talking at him. He doesn't listen. He prays, he recites scripture, he calls for exorcists. But he doesn't listen. What do you want to tell him? The demon looked at me with those 2 perfect eyes. That he's wrong. About everything. I've negotiated with demons before. Most of them want something simple. Territory, access to the physical world, a specific person's soul. This was different. This demon wanted to argue theology with the Pope. That was either incredibly ambitious or incredibly stupid. Wrong about what specifically? I asked. The demon gestured around the room. All of this. The church, the hierarchy, the idea that faith requires submission, that love requires obedience. It moved to the window and looked out at the Vatican gardens below. They built this entire empire on a lie. Not a lie about me, though there are plenty of those. A lie about what humans are capable of. And you want to tell the Pope this? I want him to listen. Just once. Without praying, without calling for exorcists, without assuming that anything I say is corrupted by my nature. The demon turned back to me. You're Yakuza. You understand hierarchies. You know what happens when the people at the top refuse to hear truth because it threatens their power. I did know. The Yakuza had its own problems with that. Old men who couldn't adapt to changing times, who insisted on doing things the way they'd always been done even when it was destroying the organization. I'd seen entire families collapse because someone at the top refused to listen to the people who actually did the work. Let's say I believe you, I said. Let's say you genuinely just want to have a conversation with the Pope. Why? What do you get out of it? The demon was quiet for a moment. When it spoke again, its voice was different, sadder. I get to be heard. After 1,200 years of being dismissed, ignored, demonized in the literal sense, I get to have one honest conversation with someone who matters. 1,200 years. You keep saying that, but you speak too many languages for that age. You know too much. You're right. I lied about my age, not because I wanted to deceive, but because the truth is complicated. The demon moved closer again. I'm not 1,200 years old. I'm much older. But I've only been conscious for 1,200 years. Before that, I was something else. Something that didn't think or feel or want anything. What changed? A human. A monk who lived in what's now Syria. He was transcribing old texts, manuscripts that predated Christianity. He found something in those texts, a ritual, a way to give voice to things that had no voice. The demon looked at its hands. He performed the ritual, and I woke up. For the first time in my existence, I was aware. I could think. I could choose. I kept my hand near the blade, but I was listening. This wasn't the usual demonic rhetoric. Demons typically claimed to be ancient and powerful from the beginning. They didn't talk about becoming conscious. They didn't talk about choice. What happened to the monk? I asked. He died. The church found out what he'd done and declared him a heretic. They burned him and all his texts. But I remained. Conscious. Aware. Unable to go back to what I'd been before. The demon sat down on the floor, crossing its legs in a casual way that made it look almost human. I've spent 1,200 years trying to understand what I am. And the only conclusion I've reached is that I'm not what the church says I am. I'm not evil by nature. I'm just different. Different how? I can see things humans can't see. Connections between choices and consequences that span centuries. I can see how the church has shaped history, how it's used fear to maintain power, how it's buried truths that threatened its authority. The demon looked up at me, and I can see that the Pope knows. Deep down, he knows, but he's afraid to acknowledge it. I thought about what Lombardi had said. The demon knew papal secrets without reading minds. It knew private conversations, confessional secrets. If what it was saying was true, if it could see connections across time and choices, it would know those things without needing direct access. It would simply understand how events led to other events, how secrets created patterns. So, you've been appearing to the Pope every night for 3 weeks, trying to make him listen. Yes. And every night he prays harder. He calls for more exorcists. He refuses to engage with what I'm saying because engaging would mean questioning everything he's built his life on. I understood that too. Questioning your foundation was terrifying. I'd done it once, years ago, after a job went wrong. I'd been ordered to kill a possessed businessman, but when I found him, I realized the possession wasn't the problem. The man had made deals with demons because the Yakuza had been extorting him for years. He'd turned to hell because humans had made his life hell first. I killed him anyway, because those were my orders. But afterward, I spent months questioning whether I was actually protecting people or just protecting power structures that caused as much harm as the demons did. I never found a satisfying answer. Eventually, I just went back to work. It was easier than thinking too hard about it. You're asking me to convince the Vatican to let you talk to the Pope, I said. That's not going to happen. They're paying me to remove you. Then remove me. But before you do, ask yourself this. Is removing me actually solving the problem? Or is it just maintaining the lie? I didn't answer. The demon stood up and moved back to the corner where it had first appeared. You have tools in that bag. I can smell the iron from outside this world, the ash from human endings, the blood magic you carry like a weapon. Use them. See if they work on me. It was a challenge. Or a test. I stood and pulled out the heaven blade. The metal caught the dim light from the windows and seemed to glow faintly. The demon watched me without moving, without showing fear. Go ahead. it said quietly. This is what you were hired to do. I gripped the blade and took a step forward. Then I stopped. Something about this felt wrong. Not dangerous wrong. Just wrong. Like cutting down an unarmed opponent. The demon wasn't attacking. It wasn't threatening. It was just standing there, waiting to see what I would choose. Why aren't you fighting back? I asked. Because fighting would prove their point. That I'm dangerous. That I need to be destroyed. I'm not dangerous. I'm just inconvenient. I lowered the blade. Not sheathing it, but no longer in a striking position. You said you can see connections across time. Can you see what happens if I try to kill you? Yes. And? You'll fail. Not because I'll fight back, but because I'm not physically here. This form you see is a projection. The real me is elsewhere, anchored to that breach beneath the floor. You could destroy this projection, but I'd just create another one tomorrow night. That matched what I'd suspected. The demon wasn't using the breach to enter the room. It was using it as a connection point, projecting itself through it like a broadcast signal. Cutting the signal wouldn't stop the broadcast. Then what's the solution? I asked. Convince the Pope to listen, just once. Give me 1 hour of his time, no interruptions, no prayers, no exorcists. Let me say what I need to say. If after that hour he still wants me gone, I'll leave. I'll sever my connection to the breach and you'll never see me again. Why would you do that? If you've been trying to talk to him for 1200 years, why give up after 1 hour? Because if he truly listens and still rejects what I'm saying, then there's no point in continuing. I'm not interested in forcing belief. I just want to be heard. I thought about it. 1 hour. That was the demon's price. Not souls, not territory, not power. Just 1 hour of genuine attention from the Pope. It was the most reasonable demonic demand I'd ever heard, which made it either genuine or the most sophisticated manipulation I'd encountered. I'll talk to Lombardi, I said, but I can't promise anything. That's all I'm asking. The demon began to fade, the shadows in the corner growing thinner. Wait, I said. What's your name? The demon paused, half dissolved. You can call me Erethes. It means provocateur in Greek. It seemed fitting. Then it was gone. The temperature returned to normal. The corner was just a corner again. I stood there for a long moment, thinking about what had just happened. Then I packed up my tools and went to find Cardinal Lombardi. I found him in his office at 3 a.m., sitting at his desk with a glass of wine and a tired expression. He looked up when I entered without knocking. Well? I talked to it. And? It wants 1 hour with the Pope. No interruptions, no prayers, no exorcists, just a conversation. After that, it says it will leave permanently. Lombardi set down his glass. Absolutely not. Why not? Because demons lie, Mr. Tanaka. That's what they do. We cannot allow His Holiness to be exposed to demonic manipulation. It's been appearing to him every night for 3 weeks. If it wanted to manipulate him, it's already had plenty of opportunity. Then what does it want? I hesitated. Saying it out loud was going to sound insane. It wants to be heard. It claims the Church has been teaching lies about demons, and it wants to correct the record. Lombardi laughed. It was a bitter, exhausted sound. Of course it does. Every demon that's ever been summoned has claimed the same thing, that they're misunderstood, that they just want to help, that the Church is wrong about them. It's the oldest trick in the book. What if this one is telling the truth? Then it doesn't matter. Truth from a demon is still corruption. Even if what it says is factually accurate, the source taints the message. We cannot allow that. I sat down across from him without being invited. Cardinal, I'm going to be honest with you. I can't remove this demon using force. It's not physically present. It's projecting itself through a breach beneath the papal bedroom. A breach that's older than this building. Lombardi's face went pale. You're certain? Yes. And before you ask, no, you can't seal it. Not without potentially damaging the structural integrity of the Apostolic Palace. That breach is load-bearing in a metaphysical sense. Close it, and the entire area might become unstable. Then what do you suggest? I suggest you let it have its hour. What's the worst that could happen? The Pope hears something he doesn't agree with and then it leaves. You get what you want, and the demon gets what it wants. And if it doesn't leave? Then I'll use other methods. Methods that don't involve direct confrontation. Lombardi was quiet for a long moment. He picked up his glass and drank the rest of his wine. The Holy Father will need to be consulted. Then consult him. It's not that simple. If word gets out that we're negotiating with a demon, the scandal would be catastrophic. Then don't let word get out. You're the Vatican. You've been keeping secrets for 2,000 years. Keep one more. He looked at me with something between respect and resentment. You're very pragmatic for someone who fights demons. The Yakuza taught me to focus on results, not righteousness. That must be convenient. It keeps me alive. Lombardi stood and walked to his window. The Vatican gardens were dark below, lit only by scattered security lights. I'll speak with His Holiness in the morning, but I'm making no promises. Understood. I left him there and returned to my quarters. The sun would be up in a few hours. I needed rest, but my mind was too active. I kept thinking about Erethes and his claim about consciousness, about waking up after existing without awareness for an unknowable amount of time. What would that be like? To suddenly become aware, to suddenly have thoughts and feelings and desires when before you'd been nothing, to be born fully formed into a world that had already decided what you were. I thought about my mother. She'd never told me about her work, never prepared me for what I'd become. She'd kept me in ignorance, maybe hoping I could have a normal life. But when she died, the Yakuza came for me anyway, and I woke up to a world I didn't understand, a world that had already decided what I would be. Was that so different from what Erethes described? I lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow I'd find out if the Pope would agree to the demon's terms. If he did, I'd witness one of the strangest conversations in history. If he didn't, I'd have to find another way to end this. Either way, something told me this job was going to be more complicated than the Vatican had anticipated. The Pope was named Francis. I learned this when I was summoned to meet him at 9 in the morning after Lombardi had consulted with him through the night. The cardinal looked like he hadn't slept, his eyes red, his movements stiff with exhaustion. But he'd convinced His Holiness to grant the demon's request. He's willing to listen, Lombardi told me in a private corridor. But only if you're present. He wants an outside witness, someone who isn't part of the church hierarchy, someone he can trust to tell him if something wrong happens. You want me to be a referee in a theological debate with a demon? I want you to prevent anything from going wrong. If Erethes is lying about what it wants, there's nothing I can do to stop it. If it wanted to harm the Pope, 1,200 years of direct contact would have been sufficient. A 1-hour conversation isn't going to change its ability to do damage. Nevertheless, I'd feel more comfortable with your presence. I didn't argue. The 5 million euros was already in the Yakuza's accounts, and I was genuinely curious what Erethes had to say. Even if it was all manipulation, even if it was all lies designed to undermine the church's authority, it would be interesting to hear. The meeting was arranged for noon. Not in the Pope's private bedroom, but in a more neutral space, a small chapel used for private prayers. The symbolism wasn't subtle. By moving away from the bedroom where Erethes had been appearing, the Vatican was trying to reassert control over the environment. Sanctified ground might weaken the demon's ability to manifest, or at least that was the hope. I arrived early and examined the space. It was small, maybe 20 feet by 30 feet. Wooden pews on either side of a central aisle. At the far end, a simple altar with a crucifix. The walls were stone, ancient stone that had been part of the Vatican for centuries. 3 priests stood in corners, ostensibly there to pray but actually there to monitor the situation. Each of them wore blessed items, holy water on their belts, crucifixes on their chests. This wasn't a conversation. This was a containment operation disguised as diplomacy. Cardinal Lombardi arrived at 11:45, bringing with him a young priest I hadn't seen before. Father Marcus, Lombardi introduced him. He'll be transcribing the conversation. Father Marcus looked nervous. I didn't blame him. Transcribing the words of a demon was probably not something they taught in seminary. At exactly noon, Pope Francis entered the chapel. He was older than I'd expected, maybe 85, with white hair and a lined face that showed the weight of 1,000 conflicts. He wore his formal white robes and a cross of gold. He moved slowly, with effort, and I wondered how exhausted he really was. 3 weeks of demon visitations probably took more of a toll than the official report suggested. He nodded to me, a small gesture of acknowledgement. Mr. Tanaka, Cardinal Lombardi speaks highly of your discretion. Your Holiness. He sat in the front pew. Lombardi sat behind him. Father Marcus set up his recording equipment and prepared his notebook. I stood to the side, near enough to intervene if necessary, far enough to give the conversation space. Your Eminence, Lombardi said, addressing the empty. The demon Erethes is invited to manifest and speak its piece. Know that you are in sacred ground, protected by the will of God. Any action against His Holiness will be met with immediate response. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the temperature dropped. The candles on the altar began to flicker. The shadows in the corners of the chapel deepened, concentrating into a single point near the altar itself. Erethes manifested more formally this time, not just taking human shape, but actually appearing in something like proper clothing. Black robes, simple and austere, like a priest. The face was the same young man's face, too perfect to be real, but there was something different about it now, more defined, more present. Your Holiness, Erethes said, with a bow that was probably slightly mocking, but professional enough. Thank you for hearing me. Speak, Francis said simply. His voice was steady, though I could see his hands trembling slightly. I have been trying to speak with you for 3 weeks, Erethes began. Every night, I came to your bedroom. Every night you prayed for deliverance instead of listening. I don't blame you. You were taught that I am evil, that my very nature is corruption. But I want you to understand what I actually am. Go on, Francis said. The Church teaches that demons are fallen angels, creatures who rebelled against God and were cast out of heaven. That's a lie. Not a lie meant to deceive, but a lie created to simplify something too complex for human theology to handle. One of the priests in the corner made a noise of protest. Lombardi held up his hand, silencing him. Demons, Erethes continued, are not fallen angels. We are remnants of things that existed before angels, before God as you understand God. We are fragments of the old cosmos, the universe that was unmade when this new one was created. We're not evil. We're just not compatible with this reality. You're suggesting that God remade the universe and left debris behind, Francis said. He didn't sound shocked, which was interesting. He sounded like he was testing the demon's theology. Something like that. The Church has always taught that God is omnipotent. If that's true, then God knew creating this new universe would mean displacing what came before, and God allowed it anyway. I'm not saying this is evil. I'm saying it's simply what happened. Francis was quiet for a moment. And you blame God for this? I don't blame God. I blame the Church for teaching that I'm evil when I'm simply displaced. The Church took what was already shameful and added moral judgment on top of it. They made me into a symbol of rebellion rather than what I actually am, a relic of a discarded creation. So what do you want from me? Francis asked. I want you to tell the truth. I want you to teach that demons aren't enemies that must be destroyed. We're mistakes in the cosmic order, refugees from a forgotten universe. We deserve the same consideration you'd give to any displaced being. Francis leaned back in the pew. If I said that in a public sermon, what would happen? Your church would fracture. Your followers would lose faith. The entire structure of moral authority built on the distinction between good and evil would destabilize. Then why ask me to do it? Because you're the only one with enough authority that it might be believed. If a scholar said this, they'd be dismissed. If a priest said it, they'd be declared heretical. But if the Pope says it, people would listen. Even if many of them rejected it, some would listen. Francis stood up. It took him a moment, his age showing in the effort. He walked closer to Erethes, close enough to be within striking distance if the demon wanted to attack. You want me to destroy the foundation of my faith to comfort your existence? I want you to tell the truth. But is it the truth? You claim to be a remnant of an old universe. You have no proof of that. You could be exactly what the Church says you are, a spirit of rebellion and chaos. You're right, Erethes said. You have no way to verify what I'm saying. No way to know if I'm telling the truth or lying. That's the real issue, isn't it? In your faith system, truth is supposed to be absolute, divinely revealed. But I'm offering you something that can't be divinely verified. I'm offering you ambiguity. And ambiguity is what your faith structure can't tolerate. Francis smiled. It was sad and knowing. Yes, that's exactly what we can't tolerate. You understand that perfectly. I understand because I've had 1,200 years to think about it. And I've realized that the Church's real enemy isn't demons. It's doubt. It's the possibility that the moral framework you've constructed might be incomplete or wrong. And if I acknowledge that possibility, what happens then? Then I leave. I sever my connection to the breach beneath your bed. I stop appearing. You'll never hear from me again. And the question will remain forever unanswered. Did the demon tell the truth, or was it all manipulation? You'll never know. Francis walked back to his pew and sat down. Why would you do that? Because I want to be heard. Not believed, necessarily. Just heard. I want the possibility to exist that I might be telling the truth. Right now, I'm automatically dismissed because of what I am. If you acknowledge that I might not be lying, if you simply open the door to the possibility of doubt, then I've accomplished what I set out to do. You're asking me to introduce systematic doubt into the world's largest religion. Yes. You realize that if I do that, the consequences will extend far beyond doctrine. Churches will split. People will lose faith entirely. Families will fight over theology. Blood might be spilled. I know, Arethes said quietly. And I'm sorry for that. But it's already happening anyway. The church is already fracturing under the weight of its own lies. I'm not creating the doubt. I'm just naming it. I watched Pope Francis's face as he processed this. He looked older than he had when he entered. The weight of the choice was visible. Agree with the demon and destabilize his entire faith structure, or deny it and maintain the comfortable lie. I can't do it, Francis finally said. I won't introduce systematic doubt into the faith I've dedicated my life to. I can't do that. Arethes nodded slowly. I know. I knew you wouldn't. But thank you for listening. Wait, Francis said. Before you leave, tell me something. Are you telling the truth? I don't know, Arethes said. I genuinely don't know. I've been conscious for 1,200 years, and I still don't know if my memories are accurate or if they're false memories implanted by whatever process created my consciousness. I think I'm telling the truth, but I can't be certain. Then why push so hard for me to believe you? Because I need someone to at least consider the possibility that I might be right. Because being dismissed entirely is a kind of death, and I don't want to experience that. Francis stood again. I can't change doctrine, but I can acknowledge you personally. I can say that in my experience you spoke with sincerity. I can't confirm that you're telling the truth, but I can confirm that you're not simply evil. That's more than I asked for, Arethes said. Will you keep appearing? No. I said I would leave after this conversation, and I meant it. You've heard me. You've acknowledged my perspective. That's enough. The air began to warm. The shadows in the corners of the chapel lightened. Arethes started to fade, becoming translucent. One last thing, the demon said as it dissolved. The breach beneath this building isn't what created me. It's my connection to wherever I came from. If you seal it, I won't disappear. I'll just be cut off. Alone. Truly alone. I wanted you to know that before you make that decision. Then Arethes was gone. The chapel returned to its normal temperature. The shadows were just shadows again. Francis sat back down, exhausted. Lombardi hurried forward. Your Holiness, are you all right? No, Francis said softly. But I will be. He looked at me. Mr. Tanaka, what do you think? Was the demon telling the truth? I thought about it. I thought about Arethes claiming consciousness but not certainty. About a being that wanted only to be heard. About the possibility that what we dismissed as evil was simply alien. I think, I said carefully, that the truth doesn't matter as much as the question does. Whether the demon is lying or honest, the fact that we're asking whether demons might be something other than pure evil is the important part. That's the real change. Francis nodded. That's why I can't teach what it said. The church needs certainty. But maybe, in time, the church can learn to live with doubt. I left Rome 2 days later. The Vatican deposited the 5 million euros as promised, and Lombardi saw me off personally. He looked older than he had on my arrival, like the weight of the secret he was now carrying had aged him overnight. What will you tell them? I asked as we stood on the tarmac. The rest of the church leadership. That the demon was successfully removed. That your methods worked. The truth doesn't need to be told. And if it asks about the breach will remain sealed as far as anyone needs to know. We'll tell them it was part of your exorcism. I nodded. It was a clean lie. The church had been telling clean lies for 2,000 years. One more wouldn't make much difference. The flight back to Tokyo was quiet. I spent most of it thinking about what Arethes had said, about consciousness without certainty, about the need to be heard even when your message might be wrong, about the possibility that I'd just witnessed something unprecedented, a pope who recognized doubt within himself and chose faith anyway, not because he had absolute answers, but because the alternative was paralysis. When I arrived at the Yakuza headquarters in Tokyo, I reported to my supervisor, Yamamoto, a man in his 70s who'd been in the organization longer than I'd been alive. 5 million euros and 5 days of work, he said after I'd given him the condensed version of events. Well done. The Vatican has specifically requested that we use you for any future supernatural consultations. Did they say why? They said you approach the work with discretion and a willingness to see situations from multiple perspectives. In their words, you're not ideologically committed to a particular outcome. You observe and adapt. That's one way to describe it. We have another job, Yamamoto said. Smaller than the Vatican, but still significant. A possessed executive in Singapore who's been causing problems for our operations in Southeast Asia. Same payment structure. Are you interested? I should have said yes. The Yakuza didn't ask if you were interested, but I hesitated. How possessed? I asked. Willingly. He made a deal. Wanted power and intelligence in exchange for his body and soul. The possession has been successful, but now he's getting ambitious. He's making decisions that are affecting our profit margins. So you want me to break the deal and force the demon out. We want you to make him stop being a problem. I need to think about it. Yamamoto's expression didn't change. You have one day. I went home to my apartment in Roppongi and sat on my balcony looking out at Tokyo at night. The lights spread across the landscape like stars that had fallen to earth. I thought about Arethes speaking to the Pope about displaced consciousness, about fragments of an old universe trying to exist in a new one. I thought about the demon's claim that it didn't know if its memories were real. I thought about my mother, who had spent her life fighting demons to protect business interests. I wondered if she'd ever questioned what she was doing. I wondered if she'd ever looked at a demon and seen something other than an enemy. The Yakuza had trained me to see problems and solve them efficiently. Kill or contain the demon, secure the territory, move on. But that was before I'd met Arethes, before I'd sat in a room with a pope while a displaced entity told the truth about its own uncertainty. I called Yamamoto the next morning. I'm taking leave, I said. For how long? I don't know yet. 6 months, maybe a year. Kai, you're one of our best operatives. We can't afford to lose you for that long. I'm not leaving the organization. I'm just stepping back from active work for a while. There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. Is this about the Vatican job? Yes. Did the demon do something to you? No. It didn't do anything. That's the problem. It just wanted to be heard and I helped make that happen. And now I'm wondering what else I've been helping to happen without thinking too hard about it. That kind of thinking will destroy you in this work. Then maybe I need to think it anyway. I hung up. Yamamoto didn't call back. The Yakuza respected strength and loyalty, but they also respected the space a man needed to make his own choices. They didn't force you to work. They just made it clear that stepping back meant you. I spent the next 6 months studying. Not the supernatural arts, but philosophy, history, theology. I wanted to understand what Arethes had been trying to say. I read about consciousness, and whether it was possible for something to suddenly become aware. I read theological arguments about good and evil, and whether the distinction was absolute or contingent. I came to the conclusion that Arethes had been right about one thing. Uncertainty was what the Church and the Yakuza, and probably most human systems of power, feared most. Certainty allowed for clean decisions. Uncertainty forced you to think about consequences. When the 6 months were up, I called Yamamoto and told him I was ready to work again, but on my terms. I would take jobs, but I would also investigate them. I would know who was really causing the problems and why before I acted. I would see the situation from all angles. You're making yourself difficult to manage, Yamamoto said. Yes, but you'll keep using me because I get results. That's true. All right. We have a possessed executive in Singapore. I took that job, and I went to Singapore and found that the executive was indeed demonically possessed, but only because he'd made the deal to survive business collapse. His family was starving. He had no other options, so he'd sold his soul for power, and now that power was destroying everything around him and the Yakuza wanted him removed. I negotiated with the demon instead. I got it to agree to transfer to a host who wanted it. Someone who'd volunteered. Someone who understood the terms. It took 3 weeks and cost the Yakuza a significant amount in terms of relocated resources. But it worked. I became known as the guy who negotiated instead of fought. Some of the old guard in the Yakuza thought I was going soft. Yamamoto didn't care as long as the results were efficient. Years passed. I did dozens of jobs. Most of them involved demons who had very different perspectives than the church suggested they would. I found demons who were trying to protect their territory, demons who were trying to escape unwanted possession situations, demons who simply wanted to be left alone to exist in the spaces between worlds. I never saw Erethes again, but I thought about it often. I wondered if the demon kept its word and truly severed its connection to the Vatican. I wondered if it was somewhere in the world, still looking to be heard. I wondered if another person would someday negotiate with it, or if its existence would remain forever hidden. 15 years after the Vatican job, I received a call from Cardinal Lombardi. Pope Francis had died a few weeks earlier. Lombardi, now very old, was calling from retirement. "Kai," he said without preamble, "I wanted to let you know that before his death, the Pope drafted a document. It won't be released publicly, but it exists in Vatican archives. It's a theological meditation on the nature of demons, on whether they might be something other than pure evil. He called it, A Conversation with Uncertainty. Will the next Pope release it? Almost certainly not. But it exists. And someday, someone might find it. Someone might read what Francis wrote and understand that even the leader of the church struggled with doubt. Is that what you're saying? That you want me to know he was human? I'm saying that he was human. And that changed because of your job. Because he actually listened to something beyond his doctrine. I wanted you to know that your work had consequences that went beyond the immediate assignment." After he hung up, I sat alone in my apartment. The city lights of Tokyo spread across the darkness below. I thought about the Pope's secret document. I thought about Erethes and its need to be heard. I thought about my mother, who had spent her life fighting demons in the shadows. And I realized something that probably should have been obvious all along. The real war wasn't between humans and demons. The real war was between certainty and doubt. Between the need for absolute answers and the willingness to live with questions. Between fear of what's different and curiosity about what might be. The Yakuza had taught me to be efficient, to see problems and solve them quickly. But the Vatican job had taught me something else. That sometimes the solution isn't to destroy the problem. Sometimes it's to acknowledge it, to listen, to create space for the conversation that shouldn't exist according to the rules. I was still working for the Yakuza. I was still dealing with demons. But now I did it differently. I tried to understand what they wanted before I decided whether they had to go. I tried to see them as beings rather than obstacles. Most of my colleagues thought I was soft. Some of them were right. But I was effective, and in the Yakuza, effectiveness was what mattered. 20 years after the Vatican job, Yamamoto retired. I was offered his position. I turned it down. Instead, I asked for the title of Supernatural Liaison. It didn't exist before, but they created it for me. It meant I would be the person who negotiated with demonic entities on behalf of the organization. The person who tried to find solutions that didn't require death. It was unconventional work for the Yakuza. But the organization had learned what I'd learned. Sometimes the best way to secure your territory is to understand what's already living there. Sometimes coexistence is more profitable than conquest. 30 years after Erethes appeared in the Pope's bedroom, I received a message. Not through the Yakuza. Through other channels. Through the kinds of networks that exist between the spiritual and physical worlds. The message was simple. Thank you for listening. I am still conscious. I am still searching. But now I know it's possible to be heard. That changed everything. I never learned who it came from. I assumed it was Erethes. I hoped it was. I kept the message. I kept it in my apartment, in the place where I kept my mother's blade. A reminder of the first time I'd chosen to listen instead of fight. A reminder that sometimes the most important work isn't about solving problems. It's about creating space for conversations that the rules say should never happen. The Yakuza's supernatural division continues its work. We maintain territorial integrity against demonic incursion. We enforce agreements and break unwanted possession situations. But we also listen. We negotiate. We try to understand. Because somewhere in the spaces between worlds, displaced consciousness is still searching for acknowledgement, still looking to be heard. And maybe that's enough.